Okay, so I'm going to start the webinar now, which is where our recording will start. And I'm going to jump right in to just say that the presentation tonight, I'm hoping for us to come in on the 45 minutes. I know that your time is precious and it is a very busy time of year for everybody. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on the course that we call Leadership Fundamentals for Early High School students. I know that we have a number of schools on tonight that are using this presentation as part of their professional development, and I'm really, really happy that you do that. The purpose of my webinars is not as a sales technique, it's simply to share our research, the work that we do, why we do it, and the solutions that we have, just so that you know what is out there and how we can help you. A little bit of my background, I'm one of the co-founders of EnQPractice Publishers. The South African viewers will know the company well. We're the home of the Mind Action series. You'll see the logos on there. I moved over to New Zealand over 16 years ago now and founded EnQPractice, which is all about leadership development, and my work has progressed into leadership preparation. So I am I've been in the education field for a very long time. That is where all of my work is centered. One of the reasons that I do what I do is because I came through a very good education myself and landed in a business environment in my 20s, and then moved into starting my own business, which was EnQPractice Publishers. And I realized that through my own schooling that I had learned so much, but through my education, I had learned very little about who I was. And essentially that forms the basis of the work that I do. So I'm just going to move through quickly in terms of my introduction when I can find my cursor, which will be helpful. Just to mention before I start that I am by myself this evening, and I do have three little doorbell alerts sitting on their chargers, and a fourth that I sometimes babysit. I have a furry granddaughter too. I've only got the three tonight, but if anybody does go off on a barking frenzy, I'm apologizing in advance. They are very sweet and usually asleep by this time, so I'm hoping not, but it won't come as a massive surprise. My previous and upcoming webinars are on the screen. I've just placed them so you can see the ones that have run already. We do have recordings of those available. If you would like to have a look at those and you haven't seen those links before, please just let us know. Moving up into December, we've got one more for the year, and that's the one next week, which is all about moving school management teams to school leadership teams. And then in January 2025, we launch Path of the Lion, which is all about developing entrepreneurial intelligence. Very excited about that launch, but I'll speak a little bit more about that as we progress. So back to the whole premise behind my work, which is that we cannot become experts at what we do until we become experts at who we are. And this is very much where I've centered all of my research into assisting our future, not just when I say our future leaders, I don't mean only those that go into formal leadership roles. Leadership applies to absolutely everyone in my experience, whether it's self-leadership or an informal role or a leadership support role, but understanding leadership and being comfortable as within leadership is very, very important as we progress through our careers. And I believe from the work that I have done that we can start to prepare our future leaders for leadership through their school journey. And this is very possible. Our research has shown that. And this webinar is covering why we would start at early high school and how we can assist students at that stage. So the structure of the presentation, I laid this out so you can kind of see where I'm headed. I hope that I'm able to cover topics of interest for you and show you some research and some insights that will assist you with early high school students. We used to call this course specifically for grade 8 in South Africa or year 9 as first year high school students. We recently changed that name to Leadership Fundamentals and made it for early high school students because essentially the content has been developed and is very suitable for the ages of 12 to 15. So, please don't feel that this is only for first year high school students. It does apply to early high school students too. So that's what we're going to cover, and let's just jump straight into it. So just thinking about when a high school student arrives in high school, how well do they know themselves? And we always ask the question, how well do I know me? And they're coming into an environment, unless they're at a school that has all the grades from the beginning right up into the final grade, which many schools do. But for many students, they're in a new environment with new friends, new teachers, and that places them in a situation where they, in most cases, just want to fit in. And this is what they arrive in that environment with. It's really, they have a communication style. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. They have a value set. I'm going to speak a little bit more about that and how we can help them to identify that value set. They have a developing self-identity, and I'd like to unpack that a little bit to share the research insights with you that I've gathered through my own research as to how we can work with that developing self-identity. They have a cultural background. We all have different cultural backgrounds. Our work is designed to be respectful to all cultures. And then they have the influences, and I've got MFTP there, and that stands for mother, father, teacher, preacher. And that's essentially where the majority of the influences will come from at that age. And the question that we're asking is, as educators and teachers, how can we help them with their process of moving into their adolescence and moving into a new school environment? When I did my research, I looked at the development of self-identity, and this is the work of James Marsha. If you look at the column on the left-hand side, you'll see that it follows a process. And essentially what this tells us is that when we develop our self-identity from childhood to adulthood, we pass through 4 stages. The first is known as diffusion, where we just haven't really thought about who we are yet. Then we move into a phase called foreclosure, which is where we essentially adopt the identity of others. So that's very much where peer influences come in, where family influences come in. And looking at all the different identity theories, there's social identity theory, and they all essentially take it into account that while we are born with or without a sense of consciousness, there's a lot of debate around that. Most of our identity is formed from our early formative years, and that comes from the immediate influences around us. So the adoption of others will be something where we take on what we see around us. And most adolescents come into high school where they are in the phase of foreclosure. And as things currently sit, they can stay there for a large part of their high school journey. Through that journey, they move into a phase called moratorium, and that's where they become open to the influences and ideas of others. And they call that the try-on phase, where essentially they look around them and they try on the identity of those that they come to admire and respect and want to be like, whether for the right or the wrong reasons. And we know that about adolescents. But that is the moratorium phase. And then they will eventually move into identity achieved, where they have a good sense of self. Now, as things currently stand, as I mentioned, adolescents tend to be in the foreclosure stage of their self-identity development for a large part of their high school career. And they start moving into moratorium through the course of their high school career, but often more after their high school career. And my work looked specifically at saying, could we move them into moratorium a little bit early? And why would we want to do that? That hooks into the columns on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have a look at the one on the far right, that is the work by an academic group called Kamives et al. And what they looked at was the development of something called a personal leadership identity. Now, what having a personal leadership identity means is that you believe that leadership applies to you if you have it as part of your self-identity development. What research shows us is that currently the majority of students leave school believing that leadership does not apply to them. Only leaders do leadership, and that leadership is not relevant to them in any way. And there's a key difference in the way that a personal leadership identity is formed on the right-hand side. And that is between the stage of number 3, which is leader identified, and number 4, which is leadership differentiated. And what that means is going from leader identified, meaning I know what leadership is, I've heard of it, to leadership differentiated, which means I think that leadership applies to me. I can also be a leader, even if that's only in self-leadership. Leadership applies to me. Now, research shows that most definitely all the studies that have been done, that the move from leader identified to leadership differentiated happens after high school has finished. So what our work set out to do was to say, could we possibly move students from leader identified to leadership differentiated in their first formative years of high school? And at the same time, make sure that they were in moratorium in terms of their self-identity development. So what we're essentially doing is saying in their first year and their second year of high school, we have them in a self-identity state of being completely open to ideas. And we tag on a personal leadership identity, which means that they understand that leadership is not only done by formal leaders and that leadership applies to them. So that was the point of my research. And what I did find in the academic world was that there were very, very few studies that looked at student leadership development from the voices of students. And I know why that is. And it's largely because it's very difficult to work in an academic sense with the voices of students, because there's a lot of ethical boundaries around working with students at that stage of their development. So what I did was I worked with successful entrepreneurs and I got them to look back at their student leadership experience and experience of leadership within their school structures. And I got them to reflect on how helpful it had been to what they needed to know about leadership after school. And the research showed that unfortunately the school experience was not helpful to their after school experience. So my work was intended to say, can we address that and can we adjust that? And through the studies that we did, we've certainly been able to show that. Also, through the courses that we offer, we are able to capture the student voice, because every student that does move through our courses, they are online and they do go through an ethical process of not being allowed to continue with the course until they can signal that they know exactly what it's intended to do and that they're doing it voluntarily. So we follow all the ethical guidelines. And at the end of the course, they give voluntary feedback that they know goes towards data research. So we're getting the student voices in a very authentic sense and experiencing what we're showing them in terms of how relevant it is to them and how relevant it is to their context. Because a question comes up very often to say, but why would leadership be relevant to early high school students earlier in their high school? And I will come to that. So that's essentially where self-identity development is really important in understanding where our early high schoolers are. We're going to find that they're going to be still largely in the adopted others. Where we want them to be is in moratorium, which is open to other ideas and influences. And at the same time, we want to be giving them tools that they can develop things like their self-awareness and their self-leadership, because that's a very, very good time to open their minds to that, to move up their personal leadership identity, which really assists them in terms of settling into their high school careers, getting a better sense of who they are and making good choices. Again, we'll come back to that. So my doctoral study developed a new theory of leadership development called seeding leadership. And essentially, I use the analogy of a tree, and I hope that there's no, biologists on tonight or botanists, because I don't get very far in this analogy from that point of view. But what I was trying to show was that we can place things into early high school developments in terms of self-awareness and self-leadership and the positive influence of others that will seed certain things in their identity, which means that if they're not ready for it yet, and they're certainly not using leadership within a specific leadership context yet, but we are seeding the ingredients of a really good leadership identity at that point. And when they are ready for it, they'll know where to find it. So it helps them navigate their high school career. It helps them to make really good choices in terms of their peers, in terms of their subjects. They get a much better sense of where to look for decisions that they're going to make moving on in after high school and into their careers, which is really helpful, not just for the students themselves, but for the schools and the staff involved, because it raises their self-esteem. It does address things like negative influences, things like bullying and the challenges that we have from a grassroots level. So we're kind of almost trying to head it off at the pass and put that awareness in with students. So that's the sort of the background of seeding leadership theory and the academic grounding to that. Now, I grounded seeding leadership theory in something called integral theory. And I've had a number of attendees on my webinars and live events that are familiar with integral theory. For those who have not seen it, I'd like to just explain and take you through the slide. Essentially, it's the work of a gentleman called Ken Wilber, and he looks at every developing individual as having critical foundations for personal growth and development in 4 quadrants. And he refers to that as the I, the we, the it's, and the it's. So as the graphic shows you, if you had to look at every one of our future leaders, and that would be the educational leaders, the entrepreneurial leaders, the business leaders, corporate leaders, they all have these developing quadrants of consciousness. And they move from the most basic of knowledge to the most advanced of knowledge. And that is usually a lifelong journey. What we're currently seeing is that things like the behavioral observable leadership style brain functions on the right-hand side of the upper quadrant are being addressed at school. The we in the lower left hand is being addressed, the worldviews, the cultural norms, that comes through our formative years, from our culture, from our society, from those that have influence around us. The lower right, the it's our social systems, our political systems. So essentially, all of that development is coming through, and it's all happening as we move through our formative years and our adolescent years. The top left quadrant, however, is the one that is not really being addressed through the current curriculums and educational practices. And essentially, that's where things like our self-awareness, our self-identity, our personality, our character traits, our awareness of who we are, all comes into that quadrant. And as things currently stand, that is largely developed after our school years, whereas the research shows us that students are already ready for that. And when you have to say, well, how do we nurture that top left quadrant and the I? The answer simply comes down to say, well, we need to introduce reflection practices and things like mindfulness, and encourage a guided introspection for students through their thoughts, their emotions, how they respond to things and why, their core values. And that's what really gives them that sense of I, and it's an intentional learning. So if we start and we seed that in their formative years of high school, we have a much better chance of having well-adjusted students that make informed choices and have a far more rounded development in terms of their self-identity. So I don't want to labor that too much. Again, I am always very aware of time, but I can unpack that more if anybody would like me to. But I'd like to show you how we have approached developing that within the work that we do. So one of the first things that we have a look at is the communication styles of students. And there's a lot of different schools of thought around personality styles. We call them communication styles. And they're not always liked by the academics because they can be difficult to prove. It's largely based on what we call behavioral science, which is not an exact science. It's not like the scientific theories that we can create the same conditions and put in an experiment and it'll come out exactly the same. Human beings have a very a nasty habit of not performing the same in every situation. But where they are really helpful is in terms of helping us to understand why we respond to certain things in the way that we do. So that becomes our emotional intelligence. And as early as the days of Hippocrates, it was recognized that essentially there are 4 different types of thinkers. And if you have a look on the screen, we've broken that down at EnQPractice and into what we call our communication styles. And they break up largely into 2 groups of people: those who step forwards confidently and engage, and then those who stand back quietly and observe. And of those 2 groups, you get one part of those who will reason through things using the facts of the case and logic. So they really are head thinkers. And then you'll get those who tend to use their emotions to reason through situations. And they tend to be more your heart thinkers. Now, the thing about a communication style is that most of us are born with a style that we have, and that's what's known as our default style. And that tends to come out when we're under pressure. In first year high school, students are often under a fair amount of pressure. And what tends to happen is that those that step forward and confidently engage really step forwards and confidently engage. And they're easy to see, and they're easy, that they show up and we take notice of them very quickly. But those that stand back and observe can get lost from very, very early on in their high school career. And certainly when it comes to developing leadership traits, they often get overlooked. Whereas leadership traits in those personality styles can be really valuable, but that can often only come out after school. So when we place this kind of a grounding foundational knowledge in for students, it shows them that they have a way of turning up in the world, and that these are what we call surface traits. So this is the way that they respond in situations. There are no good styles or bad styles. There are simply different styles. And it's just the understanding of those styles within early high school. They're most interested in themselves. And that's a good thing, because that's what we really are able to show them how to settle in and how to stand uniquely in their own shoes and not feel that being different to others is a reason to not feel secure and confident. And so their self-esteem can come up a little bit faster. So that's essentially the basics that we lay. And in the online course that we offer, we have students that speak to them within these styles. And I'm just going to play you one of the videos to show you how one of the stand back, fall over their word styles might turn up. The way that students identify their style is through an online assessment. And essentially that assessment tells them what it told them, what they told it. So they are pretty accurate, but the videos just help them to identify with students that are saying things that they recognize. So I'm just going to play one of these. They're very short as an example.
Hi again.
For you.
I scored highest in excellence, but I'm not ready to agree with that 100% though. I am an analytical thinker, and for me to get along with something, I need to understand that 1 + 1 = 2. So it's going to take me a little bit more time to process the assessment results and understand how they fit with me. I can be quiet, and often I get talked over, but people don't realize that I'm actually observing things before I express an opinion. I like to explore the detail behind things, and I can be uncomfortable when asked to come to a conclusion without being given much detail. Because I am reserved, I can often be perceived as aloof or distant at times. My goal is to be accurate in my decisions and projects. I need space to think. I need others to be sensitive towards my feelings, and I need plenty of detail to make up my mind.
So that's an example of one of the quieter styles. And as I've said before, they can tend to get really lost in their early high school years, because those that are stepping forwards and volunteering opinions and emotions and reactions to things are so much more noticeable. So right from their formative years in high school, if they become aware of their communication style and the value of that communication style, it just enables them to be not to fit in, but to be really comfortable in standing out. And I think that is one of the things that we would really be aiming for, is for our first year and early high school students to feel comfortable standing out. The next thing that we have a look at is their value set. Now, the research tells us different things about about our value sets, but it tends to agree on certain points. The one is that our values are mostly in place by the time that we are 8 or 9 years old. So the chances of us having chosen our own values is not that large. But we also know that our values tend to sit in our subconscious minds, and accessing them is not possible by putting up a list of the most common values, which these are, and asking students to choose the values that they think that they have, because it has been proven in research that if a value set is chosen consciously, it comes up quite differently to when we pull it out of a subconscious mind. And the way that we do that is that we give them a time-driven activity, which is online, where they have to sacrifice 4 of the values in front of them so that they will not get those back again. And then they're given another 4 seconds and they have to sacrifice another 4 values. And then they're given 4 seconds and they have to order their most important to their least important value. And in moving through that, and every student does get through the activity, in moving through that activity, the value set that comes up to them is sometimes they will recognize those values, but it's important that they become aware of them. We are not questioning that those values are good values, but we're simply saying, be aware of them, because we often say to students, have you ever been in a situation where you've completely overreacted to something? And then you've thought about it and you've looked back and you've said, you know, that wasn't such a big deal. Why did it upset me so much? And often we find, in fact, in most cases, that one of our top core values was challenged or compromised in that situation, or we thought that it was challenged or compromised. And we call those trigger points. So if we can make students aware of their trigger points and their core values in their first or second year of high school, we're giving them absolutely critical tools to manage their emotions and to manage their reactions to things. So the next slide is just, again, one of our students talking them through how they might see values. This is Ben.
Hi again. So let's think about our values. What are my values? Well, I'm not really sure, but I think they relate to my beliefs about what is right and what is wrong. And what I do know about my values is that they come from my parents, which came from their parents, which came from their parents. I have never really thought much about my values, or how they affect my reactions to things, or my decisions about stuff. If my values come from such a long time ago, are they relevant and helpful to my world today? I'm not saying that they're bad values. I'm just not sure that I chose them. Can I unchoose them? Can I change them? Maybe the first step is to find out what those values really mean. Hi again.
Okay, so that is an example of how we consciously move our early high school students from foreclosure to moratorium, meaning that now they're not thinking about, I'll take on the self-identity of that person because I really like the way that they do things. They're now looking inwardly and they're saying, oh, these are the values that have come up for me. What does that mean? Let me think about situations in which I've been, that I've responded. And they start to recognize patterns in themselves. They start to understand with their communication style why certain things push their buttons and why certain situations make them feel really comfortable. So we're moving the focus away from, again, trying to fit in with everybody around them and becoming comfortable with standing out within their own unique set of differences. Just something I thought would be interesting for you to have a look at. This is quite a nice big data set that was drawn from 16 schools of research conducted over South Africa and New Zealand. For ages 12 and 13, we were looking at first year high school students with this data. And these are the values that came up as their top 4, overwhelmingly. And that was not a massive surprise. I think we would expect to see that value set there. What was really interesting, though, was when we did the research in the higher age group, which was the second last and last year of high school, the fact that the values came up almost identically. Now, that tells us that when research says our values are very unlikely to change after a certain age, that is backing that up. What we find is while the values can be in place by the time that we're 9 years old, there is a window through our adolescence, where we can rethink those values and we can play around with them, and we can, just open our awareness of them, and there is a chance that they will change. Certainly through life events, they can change. But there's very little likelihood that they change after the age of 21. And this research shows us that in this case, in most cases, the values had not changed, especially not the top one, the top two. Now, I would expect that a developing adolescent just starting high school would have a top driving family value, because their family is everything when they're going into a new school environment. It's their foundation, it's their rock. But an adolescent in the age group of 16, 17, it all seems to be much more about their peers and about where they might be heading after school. Well, that's what we used to think. But what the research is telling us is that while they might be indicating that in certain ways that they're going about things, that those top values that are driving their actions and their decisions are very much still things like family, loyalty, honesty, integrity, and trust. And really interesting to see that things like acceptance and popularity are coming right low in the value set. So I just thought I'd share that with you, because as teachers and educators, and we have such an influence on those developing adolescents, I think that's really handy to know. So the next question that really comes up is to say, well, leadership literacy for life, which is what we do, is why is leadership relevant to early high school students? And essentially, leadership is such a big term, and it has so many definitions. And I've been heard to tell my audiences many times that the one academic effort at getting one definition brought it in at 317 words for a definition of leadership. And we don't have a year to unpack that. But what we do know is that leadership is very contextual. Leadership is situational. Leadership is understood and practiced as often first experienced with no active preparation or learning interventions. So what that's telling us is that our future leaders are learning everything that they know about leadership from their school environment, from their context, from the situations that come up in school, and essentially what we call leadership by example. And then I called it leadership by imitation. Now, if we are not aware of that, and we don't broaden their foundation for leadership preparation, they will come through their schooling understanding how leadership works within a school structure. And what we are finding after that, and this is what my research looked at specifically, is that moving into business roles and entrepreneurial leadership roles, which is an umbrella form of leadership where every form of leadership is needed, it's not translating well. So it can be addressed at school level by interventions, and they don't need to be our interventions. They can be school interventions, and schools are working and doing wonderful work in this area. So anyone that's attending a webinar like this just to gain information for the work that they want to do, I absolutely applaud you and would support you in any way that I can. What this webinar is about is showing you how we've addressed it and see if there's something that can help you in that regard. But essentially, what we are seeing is that our future leaders are going to need to be mostly adaptive leaders, where they're going to need contextual intelligence and cultural awareness. And these are things which are not coming through in terms of their experience necessarily. So that's what we're having a look at. And this comes down to a central question, which is brought up by integral theory, which is leadership a being thing? In other words, leadership is something that I am, and then I choose my leadership style and the way that I go about it in different contexts and situations? Or is leadership a doing thing, where I've seen it done and I do that as a skill set by observation? And what integral theory showed us is that in the top left corner of the quadrant, which is what we're wanting to develop through self-awareness and self-leadership, is leadership as a being thing. That makes me an adaptive leader, because I have a personal leadership identity then tagged into my self-identity, and I can navigate myself and adapt to different environments. If I see leadership as a doing thing, which can come through the student leader positions, which is the webinar that I've previously done that you're welcome to ask for a recording of. If they see it as a doing thing and it's done in that context, in that way, and they try to translate that, there's no ability to adapt in that. So what we're wanting to do is to move leadership within the school environment to being a being learning experience rather than just a doing learning experience, which means that every student that leaves your care is ready for a leadership role moving on and able to adapt. The lion avatar here is me announcing Path of the Lion being released quite soon, which I will again mention one more time at the end. Okay, so what do we offer? Onto the last part of the presentation. Essentially, what we're after is looking at creating the traits of all of those leaders that are always brought up at various conferences as being the most inspirational, and looking at why is that? Why do we always bring up leaders like Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Churchill, Bill Gates, Jesus? Why do we see them the way that we see them? And it's because they all display certain traits. This again comes through the research that I will reference to a lovely gentleman called Andre van Heerden, who wrote a book called Leaders and Misleaders. And in it, he says the first step of leadership is self-leadership. And I absolutely agreed with that. So I had a long conversation with him. And I made sure that when we developed Leadership Literacy for Life, which is what we currently have for leadership fundamentals, that we specifically looked at developing those traits. So Leadership Literacy for Life is essentially 3 circles of learning. There's self-awareness, self-leadership, and the positive influence of others. In understanding my communication style is wonderful, but I will only be like about another quarter of people. It's understanding the 3 other different ones to mine that then starts to place me in the position of being able to adjust my style and adjust how I go about positively influencing others. Because in early high school, I'm probably not leading them, I'm positively influencing them. And I always say, rather we show them how to positively influence others and don't lead them to just negatively influence others. So the traits that come up as our most sought after, inspirational, spoken about leaders are specifically placed within these circles in this manner. And I believe that we can seed these traits. These are inside out traits. And I think that this is a key time to do it. We have recently revamped our Leadership Literacy for Life for Leadership Fundamentals. And our upgrades for 2025, we've brought in 2 additional sections. One is all about personal bias. We do show students in the current course about personal filters and why they might, look at certain people in a certain way, but we realized that we weren't giving them enough. So we've put in a section on personal bias, which essentially talks about how our brains are hardwired to take shortcuts, and the fact that infants as young as 3 months old will show a definite preference for those that look like they do versus those that look differently. So personal bias is something that we are literally hardwired to adopt. But if we don't understand that, then we can adopt it negatively. If we can show the developing adolescent at a key time in their self-identity development that personal bias is part of their hardwiring, and to understand it and to use it to their benefit and for the benefit of others, we can really turn that around at a critical age. Cultural awareness is the other aspect that we've brought in. I always show this slide to the teachers and educators that are looking at our course in terms of who our presenters are, to show that we cover a wide range of cultures in the students that we reach across the 2 countries. And we make sure that there are students that they will identify with. We don't push one cultural background over another, not at all. What we look at is within the self-awareness and the self-leadership, we look at the teaching that will assist them in the world that they're in today and in terms of the world into which they're headed. But we've brought in a specific session on cultural awareness because more and more, the research is showing us that the way that we show up naturally as leaders, if we don't know any better, is heavily influenced by our culture. And different cultures do see leadership differently. So to respect that and to be able to positively influence others of different cultures positively and consistently, that is a knowledge set which is really beneficial. So that comes in. The data that we collect at the end of the course, I've just put this slide up to show you that we are measuring at all times in terms of the different sections as to what students like and what they like the most and why. And to date, it's shown that there's no sections that they don't like. It's just a case of which ones hit that age group best and why, and we monitor that at all times. Schools that do run their students through the Leadership Fundamentals course get a full set of reports. So you are able to see every student's communication style, their value set, their feedback comments, their quiz results, because they need to pass each quiz to move over to new sections. So it's a really insightful back-end report for those teachers that are wanting to work with their students and settle them into their early high school years. The question that always comes up when teachers are looking at our courses is, how much work is this going to be for us? And we've really made it our business to make it almost no work for you. So I'm not going to read through the screens. It's incredibly easy to put your students through our courses. I would like to just direct you to the ENQ website. You can pop on straight after this webinar if you've got a moment. And you just go to the For the Teachers page. That essentially just shows you a sample of our teacher's guide, the reports, the content guide, and 2 very short videos in terms of getting them registered and what the online site looks like. Any support teachers that would like their students to work through our courses can go onto the registration course at no cost at all. And we do that because we want you to be able to support them in any way that you'd like to. But also our courses are self-paced, so you don't have to be there. We don't want it to become part of your work that you don't need. This slide is simply to offer you pathways for Leadership Literacy for Life, for the fundamentals, leadership fundamentals, to reach your students. I don't need to read it for you again. I've just raised it. And after this webinar, you will receive these slides. So you can have a good look through, and then you know who to contact, either Jean-Michel or Cecile, if you would like to know more. And again, there's no pressure from our side. It's just simply letting you know what we have for you and how we can assist. So the questions that we raised, just to quickly wrap up, we're almost at time, is should we focus on assisting our early high school students to fit in or to stand out comfortably? And my choice is definitely the latter. I think that assisting them to stand out comfortably is a fantastic thing that we can do for them. How can we assist them to develop a personal leadership identity and tag it into a developing self-identity? I've covered that very briefly. And then my last thing is just like, what are we, just to bring up again, what are we showing them in terms of leadership by example within our school structure? And how will that land for them? And how will that translate for them moving forward? So I just think raising the awareness of that is really helpful for the students in our care. So this is my big key idea behind my work and my research. I do believe that leadership is an evolution of consciousness. I don't think that it's a skill set. I really am a strong believer that leadership is a being thing, and that we can really assist students through their high school career and on through developing a personal leadership identity as part of their forming consciousness alongside their education. An email will follow, not today, most likely tomorrow, with the following links for you. So there will be a link for the slides, so you can, any important information you can access, and you're very welcome to use that. Jean-Michel will place a recording of this webinar onto a YouTube link, so it's very easy for you to go in and access and go to sections if you'd like to. She will send you the guides of the Leadership Fundamentals course that you can have a good look at what we do offer if you'd like to have a look at that. We do offer those who've attended our webinar special pricing for next year. Our pricing will increase next year with the upgrades to the course. Anyone who's been on this webinar is very welcome to have this year's pricing, and that sits at around 250 Rand for the students in South Africa and $25 for the students in New Zealand. Our courses are very affordable and practically accessible, which is what we're aiming for. We don't want to make it not affordable, so we've made it as affordable as we possibly can. There's a short feedback URL. I would really appreciate it if you could just go on and fill that out for me. That helps me to know what we're offering is helpful and where we could improve. It also helps us to show other educators, where if they're looking at our webinars or our live events and thinking, would this be worth my time? It gives them a good idea. So I would appreciate it if you could. It'll be 2 minutes. If you don't have time, that's all good. We'll catch you on the next one. There is a QR code that you can snap up from there if that's easier for you. So coming in right on time, I put that logo up there as well, just to mention to the South African schools that I will be speaking at the 3 Schoolscape conferences in February and March in South Africa next year. I have booked to speak at the Principals Track Breakfast, which means that I will be there on the day, and all my ladies will be there too. So if you are at those conferences, please come and have a chat with me. I'd love to meet you. Let your principals know that I will be speaking there if they show any interest in this work. That would be wonderful. And just to let all schools know that if you do have conferences running or you do have events running, I am based on the North Shore of Auckland. I will be based more middle of the island shortly, but I am in New Zealand for most of the year. Always happy to speak, always happy to share my research and my insights and to work with you. So please do get in touch. Same for the South African schools. I will see you at the Schoolscape conference if you're going to be there. If you're not, I am going to be in the country for a number of months yet. Please get in touch. I'd love to have a chat with you if you'd like to talk about anything further. So, okay, that's me. I'm going to stop sharing and just check in with Jean-Michel if there's any questions raised.
No questions raised.
Okay, so if anybody does have any comments, you'll find it in the feedback where you can leave it for me. Thank you again for joining us on a Sunday. I know it's not the best day of the week, but it's probably the easiest for most of us to get here. So much appreciated again that you took the time. I really applaud you for having the interest in the well-being of your early high school students, and I hope that we can help you in some way, if not just with the webinar, but in the work that we do. So I'm going to end off and wish everybody a wonderful week ahead. And for those that are attending the webinar next week, I will see you then. Ladies, I'll just see your lovely faces, so we'll just wave goodbye to everybody. Bye now.